a steel prison door built to cage a convicted felon. And tonight, in Norfolk, Massachusetts, a mother is turning its lock from the inside to keep the world away from her two sleeping children. The heavy door still hangs on its original hinges. The narrow window still has that unmistakable prison proportion. Because the state of Massachusetts did something almost nobody thought they would ever see. It moved 140 homeless families into a decommissioned state prison. And what it was actually like to live in there, night after night, behind that fence, is stranger, harder, and far more hopeful than anything the protest signs outside predicted. The first thing families noticed was the quiet. Prison walls are poured thick, and sound simply dies inside them. For a mother who had spent months in a shelter gymnasium full of coughing strangers, the silence of a concrete cell block was almost physical. Several parents told caseworkers versions of the same sentence. It was the first place in a year where my children slept through the night. But to understand how children's drawings ended up taped to the walls of a cell block, you have to start 2 winters earlier, in a place that has nothing to do with prisons at all. Logan International Airport in Boston. Through the winter of 2023 and into 2024, travelers hurrying to their gates began stepping around something airports are not built for. Families. Mothers with infants wrapped in donated coats, sleeping on terminal floors between the baggage carousels and the vending machines, because they had absolutely nowhere else to go. Massachusetts is the only state in America with a right to shelter law, a promise written in 1983 that no family with children and no pregnant woman would ever be left on the street. For 40 years, the promise held. Then, the numbers broke it. By 2024, more than 8,000 families were inside the state's emergency system. Every shelter was full. Hundreds of hotel rooms had been converted into overflow housing, and those were full too. Roughly half of the families in the system were newly arrived immigrants, many from Haiti, who had crossed continents to get here. The other half were Massachusetts families you would never pick out of a crowd. A waitress and her 2 boys evicted after the rent jumped. A pregnant woman whose apartment building sold to an investor. The airport floor did not care which story brought you there. It was equally cold for everyone. So the state started opening drawers it had never wanted to open, taking inventory of every large building it owned that had heat, plumbing, and a roof. And the answer sitting at the bottom of that list was the one nobody wanted to say out loud: a prison. The Bay State Correctional Center, in the woods outside the small town of Norfolk, was a low-security facility with dorm rooms instead of barred cages, opened in 1977 when Massachusetts prisons were overflowing and built for 266 men. Because so many of its inmates grew old inside it, the entire building had been made wheelchair accessible, with wide corridors and showers a frail body could actually use. Then something unusual happened in American criminal justice. The prison population fell so far that Massachusetts no longer needed all its prisons, and in December of 2015, Bay State locked its doors and went to sleep in the trees. It sat empty for 9 years. Pipes drained, lights off, weeds pushing through the cracks of the parking lot. And when state inspectors finally walked back through it in the spring of 2024, they found something almost eerie. The building was fine. Prisons are built like nothing else we make, with block walls, industrial plumbing, commercial kitchens, and backup systems, and a decade of abandonment that would have rotted a school or a hotel had barely touched it. One official summed up the entire situation in 4 words: "It is in good condition." In May of 2024, the governor's office made the announcement, and the town of Norfolk found out roughly the same way the rest of the world did. The old prison on Clark Street would reopen as an emergency shelter for up to 140 homeless families, as many as 450 people, many of them recently arrived immigrant families coming straight from the airport floor. The conversion took about 6 weeks, and the crews working on it understood something important. Before you can move a child into a prison, you have to remove the prison from the building. Workers went down the fence line, cutting away almost all of the razor wire, coil by coil. The institutional signs, "No loitering," "Inmate movement," were covered over. A playground was assembled in what used to be a recreation yard for inmates. Classrooms were set up for English lessons and job training, and the old administrative offices became rooms where caseworkers would sit with families and map a way out. And one decision mattered more than all the paint and plywood combined. The front gates would stay open. Families could come and go whenever they wanted, because the single defining feature of a prison is that you cannot leave, and the single defining feature of a home is that you can. A nonprofit called Heading Home, which had been sheltering Boston families for roughly 50 years, was hired to run the building around the clock. And on June 26, 2024, the first vans rolled up the driveway, and about 24 families stepped out, carrying everything they owned in trash bags and backpacks, and walked through a prison gate that no longer locked behind them. They walked past protesters to do it, because Norfolk, it is fair to say, did not ask for any of this. This is a town of about 11,000 people with one ambulance, one gas station, and not a single grocery store. Residents stood at the roadside with signs. A group called Concerned Citizens of Norfolk formed almost overnight. The school district braced for as many as 150 new children who might need desks in September, and town officials admitted they had been given no warning and no vote. And underneath the anger sat a question that even sympathetic people were quietly asking. What does it say about us that our answer to homeless children is a building with a prison fence? Hold that question, because we are coming back to it. First, walk inside, because what daily life was actually like in there is the part almost nobody reported. Start with the door. Each family got its own dorm room with a real door, heavy, solid, and lockable, because this had been a low-security facility with rooms, not cages. Think about the strange geometry of that. The exact feature that once kept men in now kept the world out. A woman who had spent months guarding her bags in crowded shelters could put her children to bed, turn a lock, and for the first time in a very long time, stop listening. The rest of daily life ran on the building's old institutional bones, and that was both the blessing and the burden. Bathrooms and showers were shared, one set per floor, which meant a mother walking her toddler down a long corridor at 2 in the morning, past other families' doors, the same corridor guards once walked with flashlights. Meals came from the commercial kitchen and were eaten on trays in the old cafeteria. Hundreds of people on a schedule, with all the noise and none of the privacy of a family dinner. There were no stoves in the rooms and no way to cook the food of home, which for families that had crossed half the world was its own quiet grief. Winter revealed the building's other inheritance. Institutional boilers built to heat a prison through a New England January did their job without complaint, and families who had spent the previous winter in cars or airports found themselves, for once, on the right side of a heating bill they did not have to pay. Laundry ran on a schedule with a sign-up sheet, the way everything in a building of 400 people runs on a schedule, and mothers learned which machines ate socks and which corridor stayed warmest for drying. Small knowledge, home knowledge, the kind you only accumulate in a place you actually live. And then there was the sound no one who worked there ever forgot. Children. A cell block is an acoustic instrument built for boots and slamming steel, and now it carried birthday songs, tantrums, cartoons in 3 languages, and the specific shriek of kids playing tag down a corridor. Veteran corrections staff who came back to consult on the building said hearing it was the single strangest experience of their careers. The architecture kept trying to sound like a prison, and the children kept overruling it. And everywhere, the building kept whispering what it used to be. The fence was still there, even with the wire gone. The narrow windows still had that unmistakable proportion. Kids played soccer in the old prison gymnasium under caged light fixtures, and their sneakers echoed off the same block walls that once echoed with count time. One town official who toured it a few weeks in put it as honestly as anyone could. It did not really give off prison vibes anymore. Not really. Mostly. The word mostly is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and every family inside felt it. But mornings are where this story turns. Because every weekday around 7, something happened at the end of that driveway that no prison in history has ever seen. A yellow school bus pulled up to the gate, and children came running out past the fence line with backpacks bouncing, off to elementary school in Norfolk like any other kids in town. Inside, the day filled up behind them. English classes in the converted classrooms, job training workshops, parents sitting across desks from case managers in the old administration wing, working through housing applications, work permits, and apartment listings. Because this shelter came with a clock, the state's policy allowed roughly 30 days, with extensions for families making progress, which meant the entire building hummed with one shared project: getting out, not escaping, graduating. The town, meanwhile, was watching its own predictions fail one by one. The feared wave of 150 students never materialized. After the winter holidays, the shelter had about 30 school-age children enrolled in local classrooms, and teachers described them the way teachers describe most kids who have been through too much. Quiet at first, then not quiet at all. The police and fire departments, whose overtime budgets had been the loudest worry at every town meeting, reported that calls to the shelter were remarkably few. The one ambulance kept covering the town the way it always had. It turned out that 400 exhausted people trying to rebuild their lives generate a lot of paperwork and very little trouble. And that points at something bigger than Norfolk. The system only catches the people who know it exists. Every family in that building got there because someone connected them to a program most people have never heard of. So before we find out how this experiment ended, a word for those of you who are not just watching out of curiosity, because some of you are one rent increase away from needing a building like this one, and a heartbreaking number of the people who end up outside in this country are military veterans. More than 30,000 of them sleep without a home on any given night. That is why we put together the Veterans Blueprint, a guide to the emergency housing programs, unclaimed benefits, and assistance strategies that can keep a struggling veteran, or honestly anyone standing close to the edge, off the street entirely. These programs are scattered across a dozen agencies, which is exactly why most people never find the ones they qualify for, so we put everything in one place. The link is in the description below, or scan the QR code on your screen right now. If you are struggling, it may change your next 6 months. And if you want to help someone who is, it will show you exactly where to start. Now back to the families behind that fence. Because the caseworkers who sat with them say the turnaround always began with the same 3 things, and not one of them was the building itself. The first was the door, and the effects went deeper than sleep. Weeks in, parents simply stopped bracing. Children stopped flinching at strangers. A mother who has slept 8 full nights in a row walks into an immigration hearing or a job interview or a parent-teacher meeting as a different person than one who spent the night listening for footsteps. Safety is not a luxury you add after you rebuild a life. It is the foundation you rebuild it on. The second was the address. You cannot enroll a child in school, apply for a work permit, open a bank account, or receive a single official letter while sleeping in an airport terminal. A numbered room in a registered facility on Clark Street in Norfolk, Massachusetts, with mail service and a case manager who knows your name, counts. For families who had been legally invisible for months, an address was not paperwork. It was a doorway back into existence. And the third was the town itself, which is the part nobody saw coming. Church groups from surrounding communities showed up with coats and diapers. Retired teachers came to help with English lessons. Local families donated bicycles so the kids had something to ride inside the fence. One volunteer described watching a little girl learn to ride a 2-wheeler in a former prison yard while her mother clapped from a bench where guards used to sit, and said it rearranged something in her permanently. The town that protested the shelter in no small numbers quietly became part of running it. But there is a version of this story that sands off the hard edges, and it is not the honest one. The criticism of places like this was loud, and much of it was fair. When California mayors floated converting a closed jail in Oakland into a homeless shelter, advocates called the idea dehumanizing and immoral, and they meant it. A fence is a fence. A cell block is a cell block, no matter how cheerful the paint. Critics argue that every time a government successfully warehouses families in a leftover institution, it buys itself one more year of not building the housing those families actually need. Some Norfolk residents never made peace with the project and said so at every town meeting until the end. And for a handful of parents inside, the symbolism never stopped stinging. One father reportedly told a volunteer that he was grateful for the bed and ashamed of the address in the same breath, and that both things were true every single day. The people running the building never really argued with any of that. They just kept pointing at the alternative, which was not an apartment. It was the floor of Terminal E. So here is the question that settles it, or at least the only question that can. Did it work? By late autumn of 2024, community advocates tracking the shelter shared a number at a local meeting, almost in passing. Since August, 63 families had cycled through the building, and according to those advocates, every one of them had moved on to longer-term housing. Not back to the airport, not onto the street. Meanwhile, the statewide emergency caseload that had peaked above 8,000 families fell, month after month, to around 3,200. The crisis that filled an airport terminal was receding, and the state began winding down the emergency system it had built, closing hotel shelters months ahead of schedule. And on July 31st, 2025, barely a year after it opened, the Norfolk shelter moved out its final families, most into housing of their own, the rest to other sites while their caseworkers kept searching and closed its gates for good. The building went back to sleep in the trees, the protest signs came down, and the small town of 11,000 that spent a year hosting 450 strangers went back to arguing about normal things, though by every account, it did not go back unchanged. So think one more time about that mother on the first night, turning a lock built to cage a man she never met. By every standard we normally use, she was living in the least home-like building in America, a place designed, down to the width of its windows, to strip people of their freedom. And it held her family together just long enough for them to find a real home. Here is the detail worth carrying out of this story. We spend fortunes building institutions to hold the people we have given up on, and we build them so well they outlast the need. The walls of the Bay State Correctional Center never changed. The concrete never softened. The only thing that changed was the question the building was asked to answer. For 40 years it asked, how do we keep these people in? For one remarkable year it asked, how do we help these people leave? Same walls, same doors, same locks. The purpose is the only part of a building that was ever really ours to choose. If this story stayed with you, the link to the Veterans Blueprint is waiting in the description below for anyone who needs it or knows someone who does. But if you want more true stories about the strange places ordinary people are turning into homes, hit subscribe, because next week we are checking into the dying roadside motels that American cities are quietly buying by the hundreds and converting into permanent apartments for people coming off the street. Wait until you see what one of those rooms looks like after the transformation. We will see you there.